Hi, everyone.
Hi.
All right, so we're going to start our first lesson on our number talk. And today's number talk is what do you notice? And this week, I want to remind us that we're talking about measurement and in terms of height, how tall something is, and length, how wide something is. So I pulled up this image of a cityscape. And I want us to just start by talking about the vocabulary. What do we notice in this cityscape? What are some things that we see, and what does it remind you of? So remember, friends, you can pause the video to take those extra minutes to really look at the picture, study it, figure out what you notice, tell your neighbor, tell your brother or sister who's next to you, your mom or dad or grandpa. And I see our teachers are already showing me that they have a lot of ideas and noticing. All right, Ms. Rosales, can you show us one or tell us about one of your noticings?
Sure, and I'm going to start with the bottom left-hand section. There's a green building,
Ooh, this one?
blue-green. Oh, we can do that one too.
Oh.
With that, that has different floors, or
Mm.
what when we refer to in a building as stories,
Mm-hmm.
levels. And so I'm looking at that and noticing that we have maybe 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, maybe 14 or 16. Can't really
Mm.
tell, but I was trying my best by counting by twos. I'm visually
So
impaired right now.
we could go to the building that you were talking about, which was this building, right?
Yes.
So that might make it a little bit easier for you, Ms. Rosales, and for our friends at home to really understand what stories are, which is a great vocabulary word when we're talking about buildings. So we
Mhm.
can count the stories here. How many are here, Ms. Rosales?
So we have 4 floors in there, including the first floor.
So we notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 here on this side. And then on here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 too, but they might be different heights. We don't know. Each floor might be different because they vary, right?
Hmm.
And then we also see the schoolhouse, and there's 2 stories here. And this kind of this school reminds me a lot of our school and how what it looks like in the front of our school. It's orange, and then the gates are right there, and there are windows on the side, and there's like a little tree next to the first grade exit, right where we get out of school. So that reminds me of 24th Street. But thank you, Ms. Rosales, for helping us really understand what stories or floors are. Was there another noticing that you noticed, Miss T?
I just noticed that there's so many different kinds of math we can talk about. I noticed that all these buildings have different shapes, and so that reminds me of just thinking of we haven't learned geometry yet, but just learning about the different shapes. But also, it makes me really want to also count all the wheels on the cars
Mm.
because there's just so many different things we can count in this picture. So when I was counting the wheels, I know that I only see 2 in front of me, but I know that these cars are not just 2 wheels. Whatever we see here is also on the other side. So I doubled each one to
Mhm.
count the total number of wheels I saw.
And that's a really good point, Miss T, because we need to make sure that we are combining our prior knowledge with things that we notice in photographs or in readings, books, any text, that we connect what we know. And we know that cars have 4 wheels. And even though we don't see all 4 here, we know from our own experience that having a car with 2 wheels is not possible, and it doesn't exist. So thank you for that, connecting all of those pieces to our noticings. And was there anything else, Ms. Rosales? Can you share something else that you noticed about our image?
So I'm going to go ahead and refer to something you mentioned before. When we're looking at heights of buildings, we always have a starting point, and
Mm-hmm.
all these buildings are not floating; they're touching the ground. So I would like to look at the hospital right now, which is the one with the cross,
Right.
and I can see already that there are 6 buildings that are taller than that
Mm-hmm.
building there.
Beautiful. And when we talk about the word taller, we're talking about height, right? So
Yes.
when we say that when something is tall, we are talking and describing their height.
Mhm.
So how high they are from the ground. And this is a great image to talk about because we know buildings are very, very tall and they're very high from the ground. So if we have a friend who's right in this window right here, are they higher than a friend who is in this window right here? Or are they at the same space, or are they lower from, are they closer to the ground, further from the ground, or at the same place? So why don't we talk about that? When you have an idea, just give me a thumbs up. All right, Mr. Rosales, what are you thinking?
So definitely when you're thinking about higher or lower, it's how many levels up or how many levels closer to the ground you are. So our first friend that's up in the purple building, it's
Mhm.
definitely higher than the other friend over there. And we can look at the height vertically and just looking at the number of stories or floors that are, I guess, between them and the ground.
Yeah, so right here we can see that I don't know what level floor this is, but this is where this friend would approximately be from the ground, according to this building. And then this friend on level A, or friend A, is going to be, if we draw that line, we can visually see how much higher up this friend A is from friend B. So we really have that distinction, and we can see it clearly when we use this reference point. And that's what this line is. It's a reference point to really help us visualize the distance between two people or two objects. Yes, Ms. Rosales?
We could also think about what are objects that are lowered. Now, like what are objects that are shorter than trees? So let's look at the trees there in that picture. What might be
Perfect.
shorter than the trees that are there? Well,
Mhm.
um, not quite clear, but as of right now, those cars are shorter than the trees.
And then I also noticed this little sign right here is shorter than the tree next to it, the trees next to it, right?
Mhm.
So the sign could be shorter than the tree, and then the tree is shorter than the hospital building, right? So speaking relatively to the other objects in this picture. So we can talk about how the tree is shorter, and then we see this lamppost here. And would the lamppost be taller or shorter than the tree?
Mm.
I know it's kind of hard to see, but maybe I can. Miss
Oh,
T?
try the one in the middle.
Oh, yeah, this one right here.
Yes.
It looks like it's taller than the tree to me.
Right? It looks slightly taller than the tree. And if we add this reference point to the top, we can see that there's a tiny bit of space between the tree and that reference point. And Miss Yukimowicz is not drawing a straight line, but she's trying her best. And it seems like that tree is a little bit shorter. So it might be almost the same height. Um, but that was a great point that you made to look at something shorter. Thank you, Ms. Rosales. So what I want to do now is I want us to think about, what do we consider the top of something, or the tip of a building? So we have all of these different points in the, I'm going to clear the page really quickly. Oh, right here. And if we notice, all of these buildings, the taller buildings, they all have different points, right, of height. So if we're looking at this purple building right here, what would we consider the top? Would it be this point, point A? Would it be this point, point B? Or would it be this point, point C? And how do we know? So friends, you can take a minute right now to pause the video and ask yourself, what's the top of this building? What would I consider the very top? And how do you know? What's your reasoning? When you're ready, you can press play. And teachers, when you have an idea, just show me a thumb that I know that you are ready to share your ideas. All right, Miss T, what are you thinking? What is the top of this building?
So I'm not really sure. So I'm just going to be brave and just share my thinking. But I would say that the top of the building would be point B, because looking at this picture, I'm not even sure if C is part of the building for sure, because it could be a building behind the purple building. But I know for sure it's not A. So I'm torn between point B and point C. Ms. Rosales, do you have a clarifying thought?
So I'm going to say it's point C,
Mm.
If you're looking at all the buildings inside this picture, the corresponding color stays the same. So looking at that soft blue with the tall point, I would include the needle.
Okay. And this kind of reminds me of a building we have in Los Angeles. We actually have a building that's called the Grand Wilshire. It is the tallest building west of the Mississippi, and it is only 100 feet taller than the building that was before it. And the only reason why it's taller is because it has this needle that sticks from the top of the building all the way up. And that's the reason why it's the tallest building, just for that tiny needle. So if we're talking about if we're talking about architecture, they would be, the city planners used that needle as the highest point. So the top of that needle is the highest point of that building. So we can think about that in terms of our city and what it means for this building in this city. Just some information that you might want to know about our city, our great city of Los Angeles. So there are different points, but we would say that this part is the tallest part because it looks like it's part of this building, because as Ms. Rosales said, it has the same relative colors, and we still considered any needles or any points or sticks that coming out of buildings as part of that building and a feature of that building. So thank you again for helping me, and we might look at this building, we might look at this image in the future, because there's so many rich ideas in terms of math we can talk about, and in terms of geography and our city alone. So I'm very excited. Yes, Mr. Rosales, before we stop.
Maybe we could label the buildings letter and have them compare them. Like maybe
of course,
one is A, and do we know any buildings that are taller or shorter than A?
Okay, so let's look at this building that I first talked about. So we have this building here, building A. And actually, let me clear this so that we don't get confused. So we talked about the points. And now, so this will be building A, and then we'll talk about, this can be building B, and this can be building C. So when we have these three buildings, let's talk about their height in relative to each other. So out of these three buildings, which building would be the tallest building? All right, so remember, friends, you can pause the video to give yourself more thinking time and to ask your brother or sister next to you, what do you think? And they can ask you too, what do you think? And you guys can have that dialogue, teaching your brother or sister more information about height. All right, Miss T, what are you thinking? Which building is the tallest building out of these three?
Now that I've learned a lot about how we compare building heights, I'm going to use my new knowledge and say that building C is the tallest because of that needle point. It's really, really high up there.
Okay, so Miss T is saying that building C is the tallest building in the city. All right. Miss Rosales, do you agree with Miss T, or do you have a different idea?
I agree with her. I definitely feel that it stands out above the rest. So I'm looking at the ceiling or the rooftops to help compare.
So, okay. So which rooftop are you looking at? It seems like this reminds me a lot of a cake building, because there's tiers of this building, right? So which one are you looking at? The first tier, the second, or the third?
I was actually looking at the building A and building C. I've had a conversation in my head about that piece too. Like, do we consider the needle or not, since we had that conversation? But definitely thinking about the needle, C is way taller than the rooftop on A and the rooftop on B.
Perfect. And if we were to use a tool like a reference point, we can draw a line and we can see, wow, look at how much higher building C is from the ground, or from the top of building A. And then we can draw a reference point for building A. Has more of like a dome, right? All right. So which building Now let's go on to our last question. Which building is the shortest building out of these 3 buildings? So we have building A, building C, and building B. All right. So Ms. Rosales, what are you thinking? Which building is the shortest?
Looking at A, B, and C, B is the shortest here. And I'm just going by how tall it is, how tall it is compared to the ground, as all of them are starting from the ground level.
Perfect. And then we can also use a tool like our reference point to really show that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can show this is the top of the building, the very top where it stops. And if we were to draw a line, we can see that, kind of hard. Okay, there we go. We can draw a line and we see that it's still going into that building. So the building A is going above that line of reference, and building C is just way taller than that, right? Goes more above that. So thank you for that. And all right. So thank you everyone for joining us. Today we were talking about height and what is tall and what is short, and in terms of buildings, and what do we mean when we're talking about the tip or the highest point of an object. So use tools like reference points or other objects around to help you really visualize and see what is the tallest object and how tall are things in relative to other objects. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.